Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm creating watercolors with texture using the Love from Lizi to the Moon and Back card making kit. So I have the card making kit. I have a few extra add-ons. I'm not going to be using those add-ons today. I'm only going to be using the stamp set, the printed papers, as well as the ribbons and a few other embellishments from the kit. This kit is jam-packed with so many different things. I create 3 cards in this video. I also have a video over on the Love from Lizi YouTube channel. I will link that in the description below so you can check out that. For that video, I am creating 3 cards as well, and I'm using different products than this video. So they're 2 different techniques. It'll give you lots of different ideas to use this kit. So there are printed paper, 6-inch printed paper, single side. There is a stamp set. There are some stickers. There's some solid papers here. There are peel off stickers, as well as a die cut embellishment pack. This has such beautiful prints in it. And I love the thing I love with the die cuts is there are multiples of each one. They have different skin tones as well as different hair colors. So it's really fun to be able to pick and choose which look you're wanting for what you're going to create. Now, the video that I created for the Love from Lizi channel uses many of these pre-cut die cuts on the cards, as well as the printed papers and some of the embellishments. There is so many. I'm creating 3 cards in this video and 3 cards in the other video, but you can create many, many more cards with that. So there are so many different things in the card kit. The other cool thing with the pre-cut die cuts from this kit is there's some different scales. So you'll have the same image, but in a few different scales. So you can pick and choose which scale works best for what you're going to create. There's also sentiments in here as well as small additional pieces. Look at all of the color choice from that one there. So there's many different choices, many different options. And I really love the color palette in this kit. Now, this is an older kit. It's from January 2023. Every month they have a new kit that comes out that has all sorts of goodies in there you can create a ton of cards with. This is the embellishment pack. Those were some adhesive gems, 3 different colors in different shapes. Then we have some wood shapes. This would be perfect for Valentine's Day or even just, cards for family and friends, loved ones. Some beautiful ribbons in a bunch of different colors so you can pick and choose which goes best. There are some sequins. You can use those as embellishments, or if you wanted to create a shaker card. And then a package of, it's almost like potpourri. It's like dried flower petals. A few different die cuts that work perfectly with this theme. I don't use the die cuts in this video. I do use it in the video over on the Love from Lizi channel. So you can see that heart with the love die cut. This is one of the additional items that I got. I'm not using it in this video. I'm using it over in my other video, as well as some sentiment dies. And I end up not using those. I prefer the die cut from this kit, so I end up using this one. So I'll probably use these in some future cards. I love the different variety in those sentiment dies there. So the main thing I'm going to be using in this video is this clear stamp set. There's a lot of different sentiments in here as well as images. Typically, the first thing I do with a clear stamp set is use a white eraser over the stamping surface. However, I've already used this set over in my other video, so I've already done that. I'm using some distress watercolor paper so that I can watercolor my images, and I do like to heat emboss my images to watercolor them so that there is that raised edge, and it just helps to make the watercoloring easier. I preferred the heat embossing because it adds that extra little bit of texture. You get the texture of the embossing, the shiny metallic or whatever color you choose to go with. For this one, I'm going with some gold embossing powder because I thought the gold would work well with the different colors that I'm using, as well as the fact that in those printed papers, there's some gold accents in there. They're not metallic gold, they're just gold color. So I thought that would work perfectly. I plan on using some printed papers from that pack for the backgrounds of my cards. So I thought this is a great way to tie those in together. And like I said, it also makes that watercoloring a lot easier. And I'm choosing to watercolor these images because I really like the look of it. That's the mood that I was in on this particular day. I just felt like watercoloring, but you can choose whatever version of coloring you prefer for these. So if you like to color with markers, whether it's dye-based or alcohol-based, these will absolutely work with that. Obviously, you would choose your stamping mediums to fit that. as well as your cardstocks. You wouldn't need to use watercolor cardstock if you're wanting to color them with markers. And I chose a bright white watercolor cardstock because I just really like the way it looks with watercolors, but you can also choose a cream colored one if you prefer, say, a warmer tone. Now, these images are the same images in some of those pre-printed die cut pieces. So if watercoloring or coloring isn't your cup of tea, and it's not everyone's cup of tea, you could always opt to use those pre-cut die cuts and avoid coloring them. The colors work perfectly with the printed papers, and I'm going to choose colors for my watercoloring that are very similar to the colors in the printed papers because, like I said, I plan on using the printed papers on my background. For this image here, I chose one of the images. It's a little bit smaller, so I opted to use one of the sentiments with it as well. And those sentiments are also in those pre-cut die cuts as well. And then there's also the sticker sheet that has a lot of sentiments, and they're larger sentiments. They're not really tiny sentiments. So you can put them on the front of a card or you could put them on the inside of the card. And one of my cards, I will take one of those stickers and put it on the inside. There's one that works well with the colors that I've used on the front. So this particular image here, once I was embossing it, I noticed that the little girl's arms didn't quite get embossing powder on them. So I just put it back in my stamp positioner and re-stamped that. Now, when I'm doing this, I'm really concentrating on just that area because any areas that already have embossing that I add more to, they're going to be a lot thicker. So I don't want to have that whole image a lot thicker. I'm just trying to get that one area. So once that is done, I have my 3 images here embossed and ready to go. And I just love the look of that gold embossing powder. I'm choosing to die cut my images so that I have a little bit more interest on the front of the card, as well as the fact that we're going to see those printed papers just a little bit better. So I have a rectangle, an oval, and a circle die cut. I've also chosen a slightly larger of each one of these shapes, and I will die cut those off screen to create mats to go around these pieces here. I'm just going to be using white cardstock and putting ink on to create those mats so that they coordinate with the watercolored images, but you could also choose some of the solid cardstocks or some of the printed papers. I do like to tape those dies in place before die cutting them. That way I can just run them right through the machine. I don't have to worry about those dies moving. I know they're exactly where I want them to be, and those pieces of tape that I can reuse several times. So I get a lot of use out of that. But this way, when I'm watercoloring, I don't have to watercolor that entire quarter sheet of cardstock. I can just watercolor the shape. I also knew that I was going to be die cutting these, so I didn't want to be coloring that entire area anyways. By doing this, I know that I exactly what area I need to watercolor, and I don't accidentally avoid a certain area that ends up being within my die cut piece. So I have my 3 die cuts here on a sticky mat. They're just going to hold those in place while I'm watercoloring. When I'm watercoloring cards, especially from the same collection, I like to watercolor all of the pieces together. You don't have to. You can do each individual piece from start to finish and then work on the next one. But because I want to have similar colors, as well as the fact that for these particular ones, I want to have the same color on all of my backgrounds, I chose to do them all together. So it really is whatever works best for you. I'm going to do the backgrounds first, and then I'm going to concentrate on the colors or the images on the inside. And I'm choosing colors similar to, or as close as I can get to, the colors in the printed papers from the kit. These paints here are re-inkers for ink pads. They are a dye-based ink. They work perfectly for watercolor because you can get a really dark shade of that color, or as you add a little bit more water, you get a lighter shade of the color. So I find that they're really forgiving. They're really easy to use. When you're watercoloring, you can choose whatever you prefer for watercoloring. So if it's, say, watercolor pencils or watercolor crayons, or whatever medium that works for you. Now I start with the darkest of my shades right around my image. I always like the look of the really dark color right around my images, and then I fade it out to a little bit lighter in order to avoid getting watermarks. Once I'm done around, or I've done putting as much color as I want to on there, I go over that entire piece with my water brush to wet everything, just to avoid those possible watermarks. Sometimes when you're watercoloring, especially a background where you start at one end and go all the way around, by the time you go all the way around, that first part is already dried. So in order to try to avoid those watermarks, I go over that whole thing, make it wet, and it usually works out very well. Now, I am not working to make sure all of my backgrounds are completely even, because in my mind, this is the sky. We've got the moon in the sky here, as well as balloons floating up with a swing. We got the sky background. The sky background is not completely even, and I don't want it to be. I think it looks a little bit more interesting if it's a little bit dark in some areas, light in other areas. So I'm embracing that and working with that. I'm doing the backgrounds all exactly the same, being a little bit darker right around my images and fading to lighter towards the edges of my shape. Once my backgrounds are done, I'm ready to watercolor my images. I do let my backgrounds dry for a few minutes before watercoloring my images, not because it's necessary for not running into those into those backgrounds, because we have that embossing there. It does make it a lot more forgiving for doing that watercoloring. I let them dry so that if by chance my finger rests on that background, I'm not going to get a mark from my finger. So I just find that letting it dry for a few minutes so that I can avoid that. I tend to be a little bit of a klutz when it comes to certain things like that. So trying to avoid that is the best way. And by letting that dry for a few minutes, it's an easy way to avoid that. So I did a light green on the boys' clothes. I did a nice bright pink on the girls' clothes. I made the boys in all three of those images with brunette hair and the girls with blonde hair. Again, you can customize this to the look that you want. Each one of those boys has a different type of hair, so you could easily change up the hair color. I used a bright pink on the banner from this rectangle one here. Now, I do want to add a little bit of texture in my watercoloring. So when it comes to that moon, I'm going to use a gold metallic ink. It's a water-based ink pad that I just add a little bit of water. I smush it onto my desk. I add a little bit of water to it and then watercolor with it. So it's a really easy way to do watercolor with metallics. Again, you can use metallic watercolor if you want. I just happen to have this ink pad that I know is water soluble. So what it's going to do, it's going to give that moon just a little bit of a golden glow. I'm not making it a completely solid gold. Just like my background, I choose an area where I want it to be darker. And for this, it's the outer edge of that moon. There's a little bit of darkness on the inside part, but most of it's the outer edge. So once this is dry, it's just going to have a subtle glow or a subtle metallic finish to it. And then I used some interference inks for those balloons. I chose a bright pink. I chose a kind of tealy green color. I should have probably chosen, say, like a sage green to go with the printed papers a little bit better. I wanted to make sure that I chose a color that was not the same as the background, but I also didn't want to introduce too many colors. Then I chose a red for the balloons. Now, using the interference inks, it's going to give those balloons a little bit of shimmer. So you could leave them as is. I like to add like glossy accents or something like that to balloons anytime I do them, because it gives them some glossy domed dimension, and I think it works really well for balloons. When it comes to those balloons, I'm being darker on the outside edges of those balloons and lighter towards the inside so that it looks like they're a little bit more transparent. It has that shading right around the outside edge, but it has the lighter, almost transparent feel on the inside. Once my images are watercolored, I do let those dry for a few moments before adding anything to the top of them. Anytime you add something on top of watercolor, it's going to move. It's going to start, those paints are going to be rehydrated and they're going to start to move a little bit. So by letting them dry first, I am avoiding it moving too much. It just kind of holds it in place just a little bit better. I used some glitter glue on the hearts for my rectangle piece, as well as the outer edge of the moon. And then I used my finger to kind of dab it in place. I didn't want lines from the glitter glue, so I do use my fingers just to kind of spread that out a little bit to make it look a little bit more like stardust, or just, again, not have lines. Then I use the glossy accents on top of those balloons. There's many different versions of that you can use. It just gives it that beautiful dimension. You could also use, say, an embossing pen, color it, and then use some clear embossing powder over top of that. You would get the same or a very similar result. It would just take a little bit longer. And then the last thing I wanted to use to add some visual dimension to these pieces is a little bit of gold splatter in the background. So I'm using that same gold pad that I watercolored with and smushing it onto my glass surface using a brush to pick that up and then just flicking it right against my finger in order to splatter it. Now, because I'm trying to look on top of my pieces while I'm doing this, I hit my camera a couple times with my head. So I'm sorry for the wiggling or the what's happening when I do that. I was trying to avoid it after doing it the first time, but I didn't do a very good job because I did it a couple times after that. I used the same bright pink pad that I used for watercoloring to add a little bit of that exact same color to my mat. Like I said before, you can use some of the solid colored papers from the kit. I chose not to for this because I just found it matched better by using the pad. But the solid colors or the solid cardstocks would work, or even some of the printed papers that have a little bit more of a solid background. There's some papers in the kit that have mostly a solid color and then just some hearts all over it. So those would be a great choice as well. So these pieces here are just slightly bigger than the ones that I die cut my watercolor images for. They're just going to frame them nicely. Even like gold cardstock would work here as well. But by die cutting them down, like I said before, we're going to be able to see a little bit more of those printed papers. Now, typically when I'm assembling my cards, I will start and assemble them right to my card bases. And I'm just using some simple white card bases. You could also use the solid cardstocks from the kit if you wanted colored bases. But I chose to just do this on the printed paper first because I plan on using some of the ribbons from the kit. Now, the ribbons are about 1/8 of an inch thick, so they're not really thick ribbons. They are nice and fine. And one of the ways that I like to add ribbons to cards is by using some double-sided tape. This is 1/8 inch double-sided tape, putting it across my piece, adding about 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter on each side, then laying the ribbon across, trimming it down. And when I lift that piece of cardstock up, that ribbon already has that adhesive on it, so I can just fold it to the back. I'm adding a little bit of a knot to that ribbon just to make it look like it's a tied piece, but I always do that in a separate piece. It just makes it way easier, and that way I can put that knot exactly where I want it to go. So I'm going to just fake my own glue dot here. I have a piece of that 1/8 inch tape. I'm just putting it on my glass surface and then rolling it up with my finger, putting it onto the back of the knot, and then putting it right on the ribbon where I just think it looks nice. This is going to add some texture to that background as well. So we have different textures on our watercolor piece. We also have the visual texture of the printed paper, but then that ribbon just adds a little bit more. So we don't have a plain flat card. So for the second card here, I chose a different one of the printed papers, and all of those printed papers for my background are trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I'm working on A2 card bases here. So we see a little bit of that white edge from that card base. If you preferred, you could trim those printed papers to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches and have them cover the entire card base. Typically, I have a little bit of that card base showing, but because we don't have any white in our images here, it would work if you completely covered them. Or you could use one of the solid cardstocks for a mat behind it as well and have kind of a mat behind the printed paper and then a mat behind our watercolor piece. For this one, I'm adding a different colored ribbon to the bottom and doing the same technique as the first card. I'm putting that 1/8 inch double-sided tape all the way across, adding a little bit on each side, putting that ribbon down, and then lifting that piece up and folding that ribbon over. I use liquid glue for most of my cards to assemble them, but I always use a double-sided tape for ribbon because ribbon would just absorb that liquid glue and you'd see it on the front. So we definitely don't want to see that glue. We want that ribbon looking really nice, and double-sided tape is the perfect solution for that. So I'm going to use that same method to create my own glue dot here. You could use small glue dots if you have them on hand. I don't have one that's small enough for what I want, so this is the perfect solution. To add just a touch more texture to this card, I'm using one of the heart gemstones in the embellishment pack, just adding it above the figures on there. And I use a die pick to kind of hold onto the adhesive behind that gem and place it where I want and then press it down. Really easy to add that to the card that way. For the final card here, we have the moon in the circle, and then I'm going to glue that to the mat, glue that to my background cardstock here. Again, that background is one of the printed papers from the pack. Now for this one, I'm going to put my ribbon on in a little bit of a different way. I could put it on exactly the same as the first two cards, but just to change it up a little bit, I thought it would be fun if it looked like the ribbon was holding up that moon. So I put my piece of double-sided tape on there, take off that backing, and I just have it going right to the top of the moon there. And for this one, rather than doing a knot like the last two, I'm going to do a bow. So I'm going to glue that on exactly the same way as the first two, just creating my own little glue dot. But rather than having just a knot tied, I typically like the knot tied just because it's very, very simple, but you get that little bit of texture. Here I'm creating a small bow. I'm going to use my scissors to trim those tails. I just laid it on my card and those tails were a little bit larger, a little bit longer than I really wanted them to, so I trimmed them down just a little bit more. And then I'm going to add that to the card, and it's just going to add a fun detail, just a little bit of different texture to go with the rest of that card. So very simple designs, but by adding those different things on top of your stamped images and adding the ribbons, it adds that extra little bit of texture. Now there's 3 different types of gemstones in the embellishment kit. There's that heart that I used on, or the hearts that I used on the last card. There are some emerald green round ones. And then there's these tiny round ones that are more of a gold tone. I thought they looked pretty in, or would look pretty in the background as stars. So I just put those around the back. I think I put 5 of them scattered on that background. So the last detail for this card is I'm using a few of those heart peel-offs, and there's 3 different sizes on that sheet. I'm using the 2 smallest sizes. So I'm using 1 of the medium size and 2 of the small ones, putting them on the same way as I put on those gemstones. So I just put my die pick right beneath that sticker or that adhesive, and then I can put it wherever I want it to go on the card and press that in place. Then final step is I take one of those stickers from that sticker sheet that has those sentiments on it. It worked perfectly with those colors for the inside of the card, so I just added that to the inside of the card. I thought it would detract from the front of the card, and it was a little bit too big for right below that circle, so I thought the inside of the card worked really, really well. Then we have our second card with the 2 figures floating up with the balloons and that little gemstone right above them that just really twinkles in the light and adds extra texture, as well as the balloon, the ribbon, and the embossing. And then finally our first card there with that really simple image, but that beautiful large sentiment below it. And for more videos with this kit using completely different techniques, you'll find the link to the video on the Love from Lizi channel in the description down below. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.